We'll call this month's meeting of the Open Space Committee, to order. We'll have a roll call. Who's going to do roll call? Me? I'll do it. Let's see. Vice Chair Jackie Mangio,
I'm here.
Betsy,
Here.
Nona,
Here.
Gary's not, Dell,
Here.
Gary, and I'm here. Let's move on to oral communications for items not on tonight's agenda. Is there anyone on the meeting that wants to be heard? Anybody here? Come on. You gotta have something to say.
One person. Gregory from video.
Okay. Gregory, you want to say something? Okay. We'll move on to item 3A, approval of the draft minutes of February 5th. Anyone have comments or a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes as written.
A second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Okay. Motion passed. Meeting minutes are approved. Next item of business is 4A, Open Space Fund Guidelines. You'll review and revise as necessary. They were attached. Is people have comments, or this showed up on the agenda because there was interest in taking a look at this.
Could you say that? Could you speak up a little bit?
I can't speak up any louder.
Okay, try it. Thank
I'm
you.
as loud as,
Okay, cool.
you don't want loud. I'm sorry.
There, would you repeat your sentence? I missed it.
I'm opening up item 4A, the review of the Open Space Fund guidelines. So Betsy, I think, you've got some comments, or is there any specific revisions that you're looking for?
I'm going to take more time on Hawthorne's as a more prominent presenter, but just in terms of some background on the Open Space Fund guidelines, they've been out of date for a couple of years. And as you can see, the other attachment was the November 11th, 2024 recommendations on open space maintenance and funding. And that was a letter written to the town council by the then 4 members, 3 of whom are here, Judy Murphy in the audience, Nona and Gary at the dais. They spent collectively a lot of time reviewing how we were going to allocate maintenance money. And they, at the same time, tackled the issue, I thought in a really remarkably comprehensive way, tackled the question of trail maintenance. And so more recently, questions have arisen again, particularly at the town council priority setting meeting, but at other times. Trail maintenance has come up. There's no question that our townspeople adore our trails as they adore our open space. They're both very important. So this level of detail that the town council was afforded in this letter was both appropriate and awesome. And I thought answered their questions very well. And in the same way that we like to read the Declaration of Independence every July 4th and often learn something new with each reading, it's great that we're reviewing this. So I guess what I would recommend, perhaps, if you wanted to, is to start with the maintenance letter, pick out the pieces that we want to incorporate in the Open Space Fund guidelines of 2017, and marry them. That would be one approach. but I'm open to hearing others.
Yeah. Do we have any idea how much the town is willing to fulfill the original agreement of their taking over the maintenance? That's where we left it some time ago. And I think we offered something like $65,000 for last year, I think. So we don't have Darcy here or anybody that can,
Darcy's
Tell
on
us.
vacation this week.
yeah.
My,
So we're kind of flying blind here because uh, we're going to say, put our feet down and say the town has to pick up the problem, or we listen, we have to listen to the town to see how much money we can get out of them for the maintenance. So I'm not sure what we
Well,
can do.
I was listening in after the fact to the Conservation Committee presented to the town council, as every committee is asked to do, to present to the town council. And Nona or Judy, who were both there in attendance, might share the conversation that went something like, town council is requesting of the Conservation Committee a budget, an allocation for maintenance. And the Conservation Committee had a hard time coming up with a number because we can't access the town's financials yet. And our finance director of finance, Tony McFarland, said he's anticipating getting to that in the back half of this year. So that will give us some access to information that would be very valuable to know how much we're going to spend going forward, because we would know how much we spent this year and last year. Does that kind of address your question?
I think that still says that we're going to be involved in financing some of it, some percentage, but we don't know how much and how you do it.
We can't say
I
how
don't-
much until we have access to the numbers.
That's right, and every year it can be a little different.
That's right.
And so we can't have a blanket statement that says we pick up X percent or the town picks up X percent, so we don't know. I guess we're flying kind of blind about it.
Go ahead,
If-
Nona.
I guess I thought that the question before the Conservation Committee and then sort of by extension before this committee was not just how much should be recommended from the Open Space Fund for maintenance this year, but more broadly, what scope of maintenance activities were appropriate for the Open Space Fund, and whether it was, as we had said earlier, maintenance or management of town-owned open space, which would not include things like trails that are in road easements or town right-of-way or things like that. And the impression that I got from Mayor Taylor was that he was interested in seeing this committee address the question of whether or not the Open Space Fund should be used more broadly for things like trail maintenance. Maybe I'm the only one who had that impression, but I thought the question sort of went beyond just this year's funding.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, and having listened to the recording, that was pretty much verbatim his question. I think Mayor Taylor and others on the town council have the impression that those funds are sitting idle, collecting interest, could potentially be tapped into for maintenance purposes. And the question I have is, my understanding is that it was voted by the town on how the UUT was created and how it was meant to be allocated. So I'm not sure that those funds are even legally available. And that's the question that I'd like to ask and understand, is this discussion may be for naught if really those funds are already designated and there's a legal precedent that says that, no, this is what these funds are for and this is how they're meant to be used.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the real issue is that, you know, the utility tax was, you know, was not principally, but was for, you know, the acquisition of open space. And, you know, it's the reason that the Open Space Committee's original name, you know, was the Open Space Acquisition Committee. And, I think that, at this point, until, you know, we get a legal opinion, you know, from at least our town attorney, you know, of what the open space funds, you know, are, you know, what the legal limitations are. I think we need to kind of stick to the original guns, you know, which is to say, you know, that maintenance, you know, is really a general fund, you know, responsibility, and not an open space, you know, fund responsibility, because the open space fund is not, you know, for maintenance of those, you know, open spaces. It's really, you know, for the acquisition. At the same time, I could sympathize, you know, with where the town council, you know, is, you know, thinking that, you know, there, you know, that's a large restricted fund right now, but the reason that, you know, there's a large restricted fund is that, you know, the value of land, you know, continues to appreciate, frankly, more than the appreciation opportunity, you know, the open space fund has. So, I think in order to, you know, help protect, you know, what the original intent is, I think we should hold on any recommendations, you know, to the town council, you know, until such time, you know, as they can provide, you know, a legal opinion on how restricted the restricted funds are, and really leave it at that. I appreciate, you know, what, you know, the Open Space Committee and the Conservation Committee did, you know, in 2024, and I think that likely that continues to be, you know, an appropriate, you know, situation in light of the town's, you know, financial condition. But I wouldn't want to put, you know, the utility tax, you know, in jeopardy, you know, if it were challenged, because I do think there's an opportunity for the utility tax to be challenged if those funds are not being used, you know, or preserved, you know, as they were originally intended.
Now, the question still remains, there was and I don't know if there was an official request, but it did come up in the council meeting for the Open Space Committee to review its charter. So the question is, do we review our charter or not
I think-
prior to the legal opinion?
I think we need, you know, the legal opinion, you know, as a precursor or prerequisite, you know, to reviewing our charter, because I think it actually, you know, establishes the rules, you know, more specifically than we could ever, you know, make up in our minds.
I have to admit that it was confusing to me when it was suggested that we review our charter, because the heart of the question is what, in the language of the ballot measure, what do open space purposes mean? And so if we address that, and someone then explains to me how our charter is currently relevant, that would clarify. So I wouldn't want to right now go in there and talk about our charter, not knowing what the question, what underlies that issue. I also just want to speak quickly to the maintenance question, because when we use just the word maintenance, we have approved, and the letter addresses appropriate open space maintenance. And as we have been paying for open space maintenance, when the town when the town remembers to actually do the work and collect the funds from, and we don't have really a lot of say in that. We try to weigh in, but it's been a difficult process with the diminished staff that we have, who I admit they're working very hard, but we all need to get to know each other and the issues. So it's when we get to the trail maintenance that it gets complex, or the fire maintenance. So in order to work with those two issues, if there is any wiggle room at all, it will get hard to interpret, but I look forward to hearing from the town attorney on there. But I do think that just calling out the 22 miles, half the total amount, in other words, of Portola Valley's trails are road right of way. That's not open space, therefore. And there's another chunk of it. 18 miles of trails are easements to the town on private property and informal neighborhood trails. Again, really not what we think about in terms of open space. So I think,
But what I want to, I think some of this might have been confusing. Because during, my presentation, of, the open space report, to the town council, I alluded to some of the value, that the open space acquisition can have, in the form of easements and trails, being valuable, from a fire protection standpoint. It was not about the maintenance. It was about, providing access, because some of a lot of the town is quite inaccessible, because there aren't, trails, and there aren't vehicular, maintenance ways, to get to those locations. So, that was, what my intent was in that conversation. And I'd like to make clear that that was what the intent was, is, that trails and easements for trails, provide access to do maintenance, not, that the open space committee should be paying for, fuel management practices.
I think Gary and I might be the only ones on the committee now who are on the committee. This question came up before, and at that time, I think Jeremy Dennis was the town manager, and he said that the town attorney had said that open space purposes did include maintenance potentially. And so I think that's where we started down the road of saying, yes, a certain amount of open space funds could be used for necessary maintenance on town-owned open space, but that it should be based on some kind of an estimate of what the work was, what work was needed in any given year. And so that's what ultimately led to that joint subcommittee that we made the report on. And I think that the next step in really making that work, if that is the way that we're going to go, is to also ask the attorney if there should be a separate account for the open space fund so that we can really track what goes in and what goes out for maintenance. Because in the last two accounting cycles, in one year we recommended 45,000, I think, for open space maintenance. And then in the last year we recommended 65,000. But I'm not sure that that ever got spent even. So it's really, we need to sort of close the circle on that and sort of not only do the assessment, which the Judy's subcommittee from conservation did about, okay, well, here's the scope of work, go out and get the bid, and then make the decision. We actually need to know what got spent ultimately so that we can figure out, are we on the right track?
So in following up on that, let me open a discussion about what, a potential action, of the open space, committee should be. Potentially, we should make a motion, because we're a recommending body, to the town council. Ultimately, any action, that the town takes, to direct staff, or to direct expenditures or entering, into an acquisition contract, is based on a recommendation of ours. Because we don't have the authority or the power, to spend money, to buy property, to enter contracts, or to authorize maintenance. So, in that way, there were kind of two things that we, wanted to know. One is, what are the limitations on the funds, and how that affects, our charter before, we look at our charter and whether there's, revisions that we should make. And, two is, a forensic accounting of at least the last 2 years, for what that, the open space funds have been used for. And potentially associated with that, what the town is actually spending from the general fund, in concert with the open space fund. So I'd entertain a motion to the effect of those two actions, recommending to the council to direct staff, to provide that information to us.
One more question about this.
Sure,
Let's
Tom.
assume that it's actually okay legally to use the open space funds for maintenance. Is this something that we would want to commit to in perpetuity or just for a while until the general fund gets beefed up a little bit more and we get our, our budget back on track again?
Could you repeat the first clause that we would want to commit to?
If we decided that if we found out it was legal to use the open space funds for maintenance, would this be something that we would consider a temporary solution until our town finances get back on track and we can take it out of the general fund?
To repeat what I think you're saying,
Yeah.
open space maintenance, since Cara Silver was our town attorney and Jeremy Dennis was
Mhm.
the town manager, open space maintenance has been, we've gone along with that. And the way that we defined it was that the subcommittee, which is now over on the conservation side, outlines what maintenance is actually needed. And so that is in the clear, and it's been the practice to the degree that the town takes advantage of it, and that is really out of our hands.
Mhm.
So if they need to be reassured that that is A-okay, we can give them that reassurance. The real question is whether we expand this and open this up. And that's where it gets very sticky, particularly going into a year where we all anticipate a vote this coming November. I think we want to respect the will of the voters.
Mhm.
So asking the town attorney of today whether we can somehow expand upon that and maintain other things that are outside of open space. I personally have questions about it, but let's ask her.
So,
Mhm.
so just to go back to Dell's question, because as the newest members, I think Dell and I have some sort of
Yeah, I
shared.
don't have so much history here, and I'm also just looking at the open space fund guidelines, the older document that says it should not cover ongoing maintenance expenses, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the time that Dell and I have been on this, the discussion of using open space funds for purposes of maintenance has been couched, I think, in by two criteria. One, it should only be open space. So trails on open space, town open space,
Mhm.
and not trails generally. And two, that this should be viewed as a short-term interim solution with sort of a cap during this budget crisis, but not in perpetuity.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
my
yeah,
understanding.
that's just a sort of a secondary question on the map.
Yeah, and I'll provide my opinion. I'm concerned, about allocating any money, for maintenance, because I don't think that's what we voted for, with the utility tax. Because while I haven't lived here as long as Gary has, you know, I remember when it first was voted on. And it was about open space acquisition.
If I could just add one other thought on that, is that one of the reasons why we adhered so strongly to the idea that Carter has just expressed is that the open space fund wasn't growing as fast as real estate prices were growing. And so to have any hope of making an acquisition, we had to really hang on to that fund. That has changed a little bit now that the interest income on the fund has really risen substantially. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Mayor Taylor is saying there's all this money coming in. Are you ever going to spend it? Or are we just sitting on this huge fund while the town is, you know, in a fiscal crisis? And so I think that, you know, it comes down to the question are there still properties that could be acquired as open space by the town? And I think that's a really important question for this committee.
Yes.
May I
And I,
add specifics to that through the chair? Thank you. Norman. I think looking backwards over our shoulders, not 2 years ago, we were in active consideration on this committee of Jellic Ranch, which property went on the market, and numbers of us were lucky enough to see. And thinking about right now, when we get our housing element approved, which fingers crossed that will be forthcoming, we have the opportunity to look seriously at Ford and a conservation easement there that would add long-term protection. And looking forward, as far forward as I was looking back at Jellic, we have the Morris Head El Mirador property, and something is going to come of that. I mean, who knows what, but to be poised and in a position to be able to respond to these opportunities with the amount of money that we have, it's going to already be a challenge, but to be able to ask the community to participate in some of these exciting opportunities when the town is able to weigh in with substance, I think is very important. So I concur with the point you made, Carter.
Yeah, I think a lot of these potential purchases take a long time to come to fruition. It could be 20 or 30 years until something actually comes on the market, and you just have to be ready for it. I know that's how things like Post work, where they've been in conversation with homeowners for a really long time and kind of tracking what the family wants to do when certain events happen, like if the patriarch dies or something like that. So.
Yes, Judy. Sorry.
I just want to add that if the lawyer says it's legal to do what, I don't know how much the lawyer would be willing to expand out, and it depends on the lawyer, obviously, and the temper of the times, but I would say that as the Open Space Committee, knowing what the original commitment was, there's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law, and that you, as the Open Space Committee, even knowing it might be legal to work on the trail somewhere, should take the stance that that's not the spirit of the law. And even though it might be possible, we really don't recommend it. Strongly not recommend, for all the reasons you've been talking about. And I think sometimes we forget that when they bring out the lawyers, we forget that we're in the unique position of having to push back, or nobody ever pushes back. So, and I also, the idea about temporary, I think that once you start giving somebody money, you can say it's temporary, but they get used to having it in their pocket. And it would be very hard to stop. So that there should be some phraseology that says either X number of years or for the duration of this terrible fiscal crisis, with some numerical thing that makes sense what that is. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. So I suggested a motion to ask for, two different kinds of information, from the town in order to help the Open Space, Committee with, evaluating both the charter and the potential for expenditures, for maintenance. And I continue to ask for that motion.
I'm happy to go along, support that, and I don't know whether to.
I can make that motion if you
Yeah.
like, so I'd move that, we request from the town council, the, evaluation by the town, at least the town attorney, on, what the legal restrictions are, based on, the original, voter information, that created the utility tax, on what the restrictions are, on how the monies can be spent. And then I want, the second part of that, is, a forensic evaluation, of, how the open space funds have been spent, based on the recommendations, of, of the last two fiscal cycles. And, companion with that is what's actually been spent, from the general fund. Yeah. Okay, so Gary seconded that. Signify by, saying aye to support that motion.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Let's move on to the next item of business. 4B, the Hawthorne's area plan. We've got two members of our committee that have been working long and hard on this recommendation.
I'll take it then. We're going to have about 7 slides to share, and I will take the introductory portion of this, likely to go on for about 5 minutes. So thank you for your attention. I want to begin the Hawthorne's update with a report of MidPenn's March 17th meeting, highlighting some process points, lightly touching on a few maps, then Nona will go over those in greater detail. Starting with MidPenn acquired 79-acre Hawthorne's parcel in 2011. So it's been some years, but things are now really picking up. Most recently, at the MidPenn Planning and Natural Resources Board meeting on March the 17th, only 2 weeks ago, staff recommended and the 3 board member committee approved unanimously to advance the options known as 9 and 10 over across the street from the hardware store and Roberts to their full board. Staff indicated the board could expect to vote for approval of the final option at their mid-May meeting. So we anticipate, as their meetings overlap our town councils, the May 13th board meeting, MidPenn board meetings as most likely. So Jackie has now pulled up the first slide, and I will just review the next steps and schedule timeline to the project completion. You see the blue arrow, you are here. So we are right now, we've completed phases, or we being MidPenn has completed phases 1 to 3. We're in phase 4. If the board were to affirm the one access option in May, staff has said they intend to move directly from there to CEQA, beginning in early July. They anticipate the CEQA process to take 1 year. Then with the board's CEQA certification coming at the year later, early summer of 2027, at that point, MidPenn will move to, and I quote, final design, permitting, and implementation in the fall of 2027. And they expect opening that next year in 2028. At the PNR meeting, a board member reflected back to the staff that MidPenn staff had indicated it is premature to engage the town because he said Portola Valley requires a full proposal submission and MidPenn does not have one. Staff agreed with that assessment. According to the timeline that you see before you there, if the board approves an option in May, then MidPen will have their conceptual proposal, and the time would seemingly be ripe to engage with Portola Valley before the expensive and extensive CEQA process. That check-in would seem to be respectful of another important decision-making body and resource-saving too, especially if the goal is to reach a mutually workable solution. Leaving the town insufficient lead time, by contrast, will leave the one party as heavily invested in an outcome and the other party to face, that being the town, to face something akin to an all or nothing decision. That would be awkward, and I think it's something we'd like to avoid. So the main point of what I've just said is that let's consider getting together sooner rather than later. So moving on to the second slide. Nona's, thank you, before you, the hillshade view, Nona's map demonstrates the real significant difference between the flat portion, the Los Trancos roadside, and the hilly Alpine roadside. For those of you who are a little less familiar with this, you can see Alpine Road coming straight down the middle, the hilly portion being on the Alpine Road side. On the far side, above the letter, if you look at Hawthorne's above the small h, you can see the Los Trancos. And as it comes straight ahead, rather than taking that turn, it goes right into the Hawthorne's property. Portola Valley's Hawthorne's ad hoc committee, during its tenure, it's now completed its work, but it raised questions with MidPen about Hawthorne access, particularly limiting the access to the hilly side, that being Alpine Road. A sizable portion of that ad hoc committee encouraged MidPen to consider access at 800 Los Trancos Road, being that it's flat and makes an obvious choice. MidPen staff said they were not interested in pursuing that and gave the rationale that 800 Los Trancos entrance was unsafe, had unsafe lines of sight for their regional visitors. Looking to accommodate hillside land along the Alpine Road corridor to a large parking area with ingress-egress access has consumed legions of hours. So that brings us to option 10. Next slide. Which is one of the two presented to the staff, and they have by the staff to the PNR committee and now forwarded to the full board, or coming to the full board in May. A final point that I want, Nona is going to go over this in greater detail, but I do want to call out what I hope you can see if you look more closely. There are darker contour lines and lighter contour lines. So first of all, the contour lines, the closer they are together, the steeper the slope you are witnessing. And if you can make out the lighter contour lines, which are more faded in the background, you can see that there is a more gentle slope than what is anticipated by either of these plans. So both of these two options is going to require extensive grading, cut and fill, and that is going to be discussed. I think that at this point, Nona, would you like to take it over and I will chime in if necessary? Option 9 is next slide. I mean, there are other points to be made, but I think it will make more sense in context.
Sort of go to the next thing.
I think if we take it over, it will make more sense because.
Okay, well, so in either case, whether it's option 10 or option 9, there's a considerable amount of grading that's required. So if you're on Alpine Road and you think about where Alpine Trail is which is elevated above Alpine Road. Either option 9 or option 10 requires the construction of a berm above Alpine Trail, which is created from cut that's taken from the hillside parallel to Alpine to make this roadway. So the roadway here and the parking, whether it's option 9 or option 10, the idea is that it would be on a bench, basically, that's elevated above Alpine Trail and screened from the roadside and from the trail by a berm between the trail and the parking area. There's a section diagram. I don't know if we have that included.
Before we move to this section, well, we'll go back to. the
Okay.
other one.
So these are section diagrams, and I don't know if you can actually read the numbers on them, but the idea is looking at option, I guess 9 is on the top and 10 is below, showing how much cut and fill there would be and where the parking lanes would be relative to the elevation of Alpine Trail and to Alpine Road. So you really have to sort of think about how that would appear from Alpine Road. Basically, instead of looking at that gentle slope going up the hill into Hawthorns, you'd be looking at the berm, well, the slope that goes up to Alpine Trail, a berm behind that screens the parking, and then another steep cut behind that. And in some cases, the cut would be even steeper because this isn't a section through the turnout for the fire trucks, which goes farther into the hill.
Adding on to what Nona just said, approximate, these are conceptual maps, so nothing is for sure, but according to the conceptual maps, the road elevation is at 556 feet, the Alpine Road elevation. Up from there, the parking lot is at 580 feet. So we have a plus 24-foot rise between the two. Then the Hammerhead turnout is at 593 feet. So you get a sense of a continuing uphill slope. That is also shown if you go backwards to option 9 or 10, you can look at the retaining wall. I'll just call out the Hammerhead. Okay, either Hammerhead has the same thing. They have put what they call a 3-foot retaining wall at the back of the Hammerhead.
Yeah.
But as you look at the contouring that is
It's
going
not.
around it on either side,
That retaining wall is
It's-
at least 11 feet tall.
yeah, it's insubstantial to the job.
1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are 1-foot contours. So
Yeah,
that retaining wall is at least 8 feet. And then there's a 2-to-1 slope above it.
Right,
It's
so-
it's a monstrous project.
it would be a major impact on the hillside. And as drawn there, if you take both sides of the parking lot, it's 50 spaces. So 21 on one side and 29 on the other.
This is not good stewardship, of open space.
It will have quite an aesthetic impact on the view shed.
So is, to kind of, I think, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was trying to cut to the chase.
We have a few more slides to share.
Okay.
So, we really thought about this a lot. What are the alternatives? And at one point, one alternative that we talked about, well, actually, this sort of elaborates a little bit more on what we've just been talking about. So this is an elevation profile going from Alpine Road on the left, going through that actual Hammerhead, and then over the crest of the Hawthorns to on the right, where the racetrack loop is, within Hawthorns, just before you get to Los Trancos Creek. And the point of this is simply to show that rather than using the nice flat area, which is the racetrack loop, which would would be an okay area for a parking area if you really needed a parking area. We're cutting into a hillside here is the gist of it. And-
In the ASCC, years and years ago, kind of created a phrase that said, if you wanted flat ground, you should have bought it. And in this situation, if you want a parking lot, you should put, the parking lot where the ground's flat.
Yeah. Well, and to take this one step further, we're questioning whether or not a parking lot on site on the Hawthorns is actually needed. And so we've been trying to think of alternatives. Mid-Penn actually thought of an alternative themselves early on in the process when they wondered, well, is the parking behind Roberts, for example, would that be accessible to use for parking for access to Hawthorns?
Well, if I can tag in there, Nona, this is referring to the agenda package that they shared with their public access working group August 26th of 2023. And well, I can't tell you the exact page 85 it looks like, or page 2, depending upon which one you're looking at. They were examining their parking lots at a number of other Mid-Penn parcels. So 6 other Mid-Penn properties, including the top of Windy Hill Anniversary Trail parking lot, and some that might be less relevant. So as well as adding on to those 6, they studied Roberts Market, which at the time I didn't absorb as being as viable an idea as I have eventually come around to thinking, not Roberts specifically, but just looking at the parking that exists across the street as an
Has
alternative.
anybody
So we get to that.
done any kind of observation on how many spaces tend to be open behind the market at any given time?
I think we have to be very careful there. Those are privately owned parcels, and even recommending or suggesting that that the open space district would have an opportunity to use those is likely unacceptable and probably illegal.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a rat hole that I don't suggest that we go down.
Mhm.
And we don't either. I'm just saying that they were thinking
Mhm.
initially of alternatives to putting parking on the Hawthorns property itself.
So we have a variation on a theme to recommend. It was something that came. Next slide. Yeah. Do you want to start this or shall I?
Either way, go ahead if you want.
No, you go.
Okay, well, I'm going to credit Betsy with this idea since it was hers. But one of the things we wondered about is if you look at the parcel boundaries for, say, the parcel that the hardware store is on, that southern parcel boundary for the hardware store is basically just north of the parallel parking that you have adjacent to Triangle Park. And you could actually increase the parking that's available there, not on the hardware parcel, but on town-owned, basically, road remnant is what the Triangle Park really is, by converting the parallel parking to pull-in parking. It would take a few feet out of Triangle Park, but only a few feet, and you could very significantly increase the amount of parking that would be there. You would be widening the parking area there to about 63, 65 feet, which is a little more than is required, but would be a reasonable probably amount for having 2 lanes of pull-in parking opposite one another. This is just a concept idea of, is there some other place to put what seems like the amount of parking you might really need for Hawthorns at this stage?
And I think it's trying to be sensitive to Mid-Penn, who, having said no way Los Trancos, and having said because the other idea and an idea that I raised, I want to give full credit to Trails and Paths. Fred Leach, at the time the chair, brought to the ad hoc committee the idea of, let's not do parking, let's just open Hawthorne's as is. And that idea grew on me and other people as we worked further and further along with the plans that they did raise. So as we try to meet Mid-Penn where they are and think, all right, well, this isn't okay and that isn't okay, and you really feel you need 20-some parking places, how about this? And because it's town-owned, the town can do it and stay out of the complexities.
Yeah.
that- Yeah,
One of the interesting things we learned thinking about this is I went through old aerial photos. And if you go back to the 1930 aerial of this area, which is a really beautiful photo, the road configuration for Alpine Road and Portola Road is as you see at present. And then sometime between, I think it was 1948 and 1953, the road actually made the curve that you see going in front of the hardware store now. And so that was the main, there was like a cutoff. I don't know what the reasoning was, but then a couple of decades later, by the 70s, they put it back to having a regular intersection with right angles. Just a really interesting thing to realize that, you know, some of the things you think have been there forever really haven't been. I wasn't aware of that. That was before I lived here, so.
Yeah.
Really interesting. But that's why the parcel boundary is the way it is now for the hardware store, I assume, because that was the road for some number of years between the 50s and the 70s.
Tag teaming again, one more contribution, the either option 9 or 10, you can see the word gate sort of around where the yellow line crosses the access road there. They anticipate putting a gate. The issue here is that sometimes people arrive to go parking and the gate is, to go hiking and the gate is closed because Hawthorne's, unlike Windy Hill, will have gates and firmly stated hours. So what does the car do that turns in and meets a closed gate? What happened over at Neely when Neely asked for the cup to be able to do wine tasting and small bites was create a full turnaround so that cars that met that gate were able to do a full U-turn and get out of there without having to back out onto Portola Road. And that's going to be something that I'm sure ASCC planning will insist upon again, because as it is, the car would be backing out onto Alpine Road. So there are a number of issues, even apart from the many difficulties presented by the parking lot itself, that solutions are going to be hard pressed. So whether you all in the town want to weigh in with thoughts about.
Betsy, yeah, I can start out. How did they come up with the number of parking spots there? It looks like there's 70 or 80 of them. 50?
50.
What are they talking about? 50? That's maybe 300-400 people. If it's impossible to do a decent job, I would be in favor of whatever we can do, and maybe we can't do anything. It's just to have fewer parts, cut it in half. I don't understand why we have to have enough for a couple, 300 people at a time out there.
They are talking, excuse me for speaking loudly, they are talking about staging it and building out 50% of this first, and then the second half as needed.
Yeah.
The half that they proposed building out was that which was deeper into the hillside, and then adding the more proximate to Alpine Roadside as a second phase as they determined what the usage would be. That was their
Are
proposal.
they actually
It's-
going to
it's-
do a staged process, you think?
It's just the wrong place.
Yeah.
I mean, Jackie, could you go back to the aerial mapping, with the LiDAR? Keep going. Back. One more.
This is the
No, okay, go forward, please. It's, yes,
One more.
that's it.
There you
There we go.
Whoops, back. Yeah.
Okay, this map is the most important thing. Okay, yeah. In the 79 acres, there's only, the reason that the property was, developed in the 1860s, on the flat portion, that was the portion where human habitation and vehicles and trailers, horses and wagons, you could actually have it without grading. And I think this committee and the town should challenge the open space, on the appropriate response, to the protection of open space. In their charter, I can guarantee you, that grading a parking lot, with the amount of grading that is going to be required is absolutely, antithetical, to the charter, for the protection of open space. And the racetrack, since all the buildings are gone, and well, it was a junkyard for all the years that, I've lived here in town, since, except for the last 15 years, where they, cleaned up the junky cars. That was a junkyard, and it should be a parking lot. It was a parking lot for for almost 100 years. It was a parking lot. You can actually see the indent, of the racetrack, in the LiDAR image. It also would cost less than a third, the expense, to build that parking lot there. So it brings me to what I think the summary of this item should be. After reviewing this, I'm thinking about it for a very, very long time. Thank you. Because you can actually see the oval, of the racetrack. And it started out as a horse racetrack, and it then became a dirt track for cars. It's the Open Space Committee, I believe, should do two things. One is, to have the town council and staff remind the open space that they don't have the right to build anything on that property until there's a conditional use permit on that property. They can't open the property to the public until there's a conditional use permit.
And Carter, just to clarify, when you say remind open space, you mean mid-pen?
Yes, that's what I mean, Mid-Penn, the open space district. Because Mid-Penn drives me nuts. It's the open space district, because we need to remind them that it is about open space. I believe there is, some level of politics associated with the open space district's actions, that wants to mistreat the town of Portola Valley and force something down our throat. The historic complex, from an acreage standpoint, and from their planning, describes this parcel, as being the historic complex. But the historic complex was really about the historic buildings, and the buildings are gone. They were demolished. The junk cars were, pulled off. And that the open space district should utilize the land in a more appropriate way. So the action, I the town council needs to stop sitting on their hands, you know, and letting the open space district think that they're planning something, you know, to spend some part of their $305 million, you know, on a parking lot, you know, that where they could spend less than a third of that money, you know, and put it in a place that actually accomplishes more and provides far better, you know, handicap accessibility.
I have a question too. I have to play catch up on this project a little bit since I'm new to the committee. But it seems to me that the reason that house was built there in the first place is because it was flat land and it's good access off of a road, right? And also, you might want to think about where would people actually want to go walking on the property? Do they want to go up a really steep hill? Or do they want to start on a nice flat trail that could eventually take them to the top of the steep hill? Because if you're talking about accessibility, I mean, what's the use in putting wheelchair access if the trail goes straight up from the parking lot and you can't even access it? So just thinking out loud about what's the eventual trail system going to be, and you know, how do they think about how people are going to use it?
I think one of the ways that question would have been answered at some point by the Open Space District is that when there was a plan to use the lower barn as a facility, it would have required that the entrance be on an arterial road, and Los Trancos isn't one currently. So I think that's one reason why they eliminated that area as a possibility for parking. Whether or not that has changed now that the lower barn, as far as I know, there are no plans for the lower barn.
Yeah.
That may have changed
Los
that.
Trancos Road seems like it has a lot less traffic than Alpine Road too.
The entrance would, if it were at the old entrance to the property, it's on a curve
Yeah, I've
in the
seen
road.
that,
So
yeah.
the visibility is a question
Mhm.
that they've raised as well.
Mhm.
But getting back to Carter's point, it's also the case that option 10 would put a lot of grading and a lot of tree removal in the unimproved portion of the property. And the conservation easement specifically prohibits that. So I guess option 9 could have been a possibility that would be consistent with the conservation easement, but option 10, at least. the way
Well,
I read
Yeah,
it, would
I was
not
going
be.
to ask that question. There's a 75-foot conservation easement. That's what you're talking about, Nona?
Actually, I was talking about the conservation easement on the property as a whole, which is
Oh,
held
okay.
by post. And then, of course, there's the 75-foot scenic corridor, which
Yeah.
also that would be within.
That's an issue as well, right? Because that falls within,
Not necessarily. The 75-foot scenic corridor applies to building structures, but not to parking. So not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Another thing about option 10 that's might be a little bit troublesome. You, at first glance, you think, oh, okay, there's stop signs here. That would be a great way to just add another stop sign and move it in there. But then there's the fact that kids come out of the school every day en masse and do that crossing. And do you want to add cars going up the hill into that mix, which
Cars
might,
going both ways. I
yeah,
mean,
cars going both ways. I mean, are we adding a hazard there?
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
if you I drive out sometimes when those kids are coming out of school or walk down to the
I-
hardware store, and they're just coming down that slope at such a rapid speed.
Mhm.
While I don't disagree, you know, with the comments around access, you know, and traffic patterns, I think that, you know, the open space response, you know, should stay focused on, you know, open space, you know, preservation
Mhm.
and aspects. The value of that hillside, you know, as it currently exists, you know, is as open space. You know, putting a parking lot in it, you know, is antithetical, you know, to the protection of open space. It's antithetical, you know, to the conservation easement that the owner through post, put on the property. They need to use, if a parking lot is necessary, and I believe it is, because, I live on a street, that is impacted, by open space parking, and so I believe that the open space district needs to respond appropriately to provide access. A parking lot makes sense, from a use standpoint, and the parking lot needs to be put in a place, where, grading doesn't affect the open space character. It needs to be in a place that has previously had development, in effect as a brownfield, and not an area that hasn't had development. And, from an action, I'd request a motion, to make a recommendation to the town council and staff, to remind the open space district in writing, of the process necessary, to pursue a conditional use permit for the open space use by the public, of a residential property, because the property is currently zoned residential, and that all efforts, to provide parking, on an a previously undeveloped part of the property should be abandoned, and that the parking lot, if deemed necessary by the open space district, be developed, on lands that have previously been developed for human habitation and uses.
I can support that.
Would you make that motion?
I make that motion.
I second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Carter.
Yeah, that seems like the right level to attack this problem.
Yeah.
Even though all these other things we're talking about are relevant. About
Well, I-
grading and traffic and all of this other kind of
Well,
stuff.
that's what the conditional use permit process is about. And that's actually, I don't believe that the open space district is the appropriate, forum, for the CEQA analysis.
Hmm.
I believe, the town should be the lead agency, for, the CEQA analysis, since this is lands within the town. David?
All right. Yes, I'm really happy I attended this meeting actually, because I've been to a lot of the Mid-Penn meetings and some of the town council meetings about Mid-Penn. And I kind of bought their line that Los Trancos is dangerous, which it is, because I come in and out of there every day and it's not a great place. And the idea of putting a four-way stop instead of a three-way stop at Portola Road sounds really good. So I was kind of on board with that until tonight, looking at the topos with the extent of the slope and the amount of cut. It's like, oh my God, I sort of knew some of that before, but so I'm on board with what you're trying to do, and I'm glad that you had this meeting. Thanks.
Is there any other public comment on this issue? Yes, Judith? You betcha. Just ask away. I can't promise we got an answer. though.
I had been led to understand that Mid-Penn was rather like the school district, that we had a more limited ability to control what they did than we do for trying to build something, that we had a lot of control about road access, and that was the entry point onto being able to hold their feet to the fire, but that we didn't, in fact, have that much to say about what they actually did with the land. Is that wrong?
I believe that that's wrong.
Oh, good.
I was on the ASCC, when the open space district came to the town to open Windy Hill.
Mhm.
and build the parking lot. And there was a lot to be said, by the town, on, the coordination, the grading, the improvements. And it was, definitely intended to be under improved, and kept more natural. The reason that site was the preferred site is it required, for the Windy Hill parking lot, rather than someplace else on the property, was that it was already flat. It didn't require, very much grading. It didn't require very much improvement.
Judith, I noticed that you're on the phone. Did you want to comment on this? Judith Haskell?
Judy.
Okay, can you hear me?
No, I can't hear you. I haven't turned my hearing aid up. Go ahead, Judy.
Okay. So look, the analysis is very much appreciated, and this to me turns on whether it's a legal question of the jurisdiction of the town relative to the district, as Judy Murphy pointed out. It's going to take some legal dollars to understand this and confirm it. And we are in the process of appointing an attorney for this project since our normal town attorney is conflicted out. So just want people to understand that we don't have a definitive legal assessment of what the jurisdiction is. I do take the point that we ought to understand it. So just work to do there more than any other comment that I've got. So I take that, and we'll keep you updated as we get that council engaged.
If I could recommend, Judith, that an incredible expert, is still within our midst, in the form of Tom Vlasic. He was the working with George Mader as the
Yeah.
town planner at the time, and I think that there would be some valuable consulting, that would be more affordable, than a new
Yeah.
specific town attorney to get your feet wet on this. And
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
his records are still available as well.
Yeah.
Because that was a large action, taking on nearly 1,200 acres, of open space and access, and it's ironic that the parking lot for for 1,200 acres, is not much bigger than what they're proposing, for a parking lot on 80 acres.
Yeah, no, I do think Tom could be a good resource for history. It's not either or though. It's got to be both, because I don't know what the facts were at the time Windy Hill was going through whatever it went through. But I take your point. Save the legal dollars until we get the context and then figure out where they're best spent. I agree with that. So we'll take that on.
Thanks for your comments tonight.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Could I raise one more comment?
You betcha.
Judy's comment about the similarity between the open space district and the school district reminded me of something that people have also talked about in terms of parking, which is that when most of the parking is needed for open space, it's on the weekend, and the school, Corte Madera school parking lot could be available for that parking at that time. So that would actually potentially decrease the need for parking on Hawthorne's itself.
I have a little new news about that. Thanks to Judy Murphy's question of me the other day, because I mentioned it and she said, really? And so I said, well, I better do some due diligence on that. So I have been in touch with, and Gary Hanning sent me last night some information that suggests that it would be a matter for the board to discuss, because their primary purpose in facilities is to support the local community and development. And outside of those primary purposes, it would have to go before the board. So I didn't want to leave it out there that it was a for sure thing, which in the beginning I had kind of hoped that it was a more common resource than it turns out to be. It used to be that the dish at Stanford used the Nixon Elementary School down the way, which first gave me a notion that this would be possible. But with the advent of COVID and other safety issues, schools have become a little bit more cautious. So, but there are other, I mean, we've done a lot of brainstorming, made a lot of progress. And the one thing that, to Judith Haska's point, but also marrying that point with Judy Murphy's idea around the school district and the things that I have learned just by observing. Judith, you've been on the planning commission, so you would know, but I thought that the ingress egress cutting into the road where we allow that to happen, that's almost a black and white issue, whether how much leverage we have over their grading once that decision is made and done, what they do behind, within their own property, is more nuanced a decision. But I did think that Portola Valley was on very firm ground about allowing for or not cuts in the Alpine Road and allowing for much the volume of access that this would call for.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next item of business, 5A, the role of the Open Space Acquisition Committee, in identifying lands, for acquisition. This was an item that I put on the agenda, because I believe that, as Betsy brought up.
Are you going to open that up for a public comment on Hawthorne's?
I did already, Christie. So I'm moving on to I'm moving on to the next item.
Okay.
So, Betsy, you mentioned things that I've been thinking about for a long time. The El Bernardo Ranch, the Hawthorns, and the Fogarty lands, as well as other kinds of connectivity, across the Western Hills, and up through some of the draws and drainages, and the lands that kind of make up the Arrowhead Meadows and the Alpine Hills, subdivisions. And I think that part of what the Open Space Acquisition Committee can do, is help to facilitate some of the things that the Conservation Committee has been mentioning, around wildlife corridors. Because those wildlife corridors or some of those drainages, could be places where, we could come back to lands that either are undeveloped or, or underdeveloped, that additional trail easements or conservation easements could be, acquired. The other thing that to me is, has come to mind, around the Hawthorns, is how valuable that open space, would be, as an asset, for the town, in contrast to being a liability, for the open space district. As the open space district, it doesn't have any, literal connectivity to its own lands or other open space, lands that they're in control of. And to me, an example of that problem, is, are the historic structures, and the difficulty that they have, dealing with them, and the difficulty that they have dealing with opening it, to the public. I think Fred Leach's comments, around, opening it, to the building out and doing the trails first, would be, a logical outgrowth, of what the town would do, in contrast. And that, if a parking lot, if a parking problem, arose, then if this were town property, then the town would look for, kind of the micro, decisions to solve that problem, like expanding, the parking opportunity with Triangle Park, negotiating, a parking agreement, with the school district, thinking about the interconnectivity, with, town trails, or the trails, within, the Portola Valley Ranch, instead of being in conflict, be in concert. And, I've imagined, in my own mind, using the open space funds, to, convert this property, from regional open space district lands, to town of Portola Valley, open space lands. It would alleviate a liability that the district, is saddled with right now, and provide, for, an incredible opportunity, where the town could, own, operate, manage, the 80 acres that's wholly within, the town, and rather than, being subject, to decision-making outside. Go ahead.
I have to, I mean, it's a bold, radical, wonderful idea that I would love to entertain with the decision-making bodies that we have here. It's not a slam dunk deal. However, there's a lot of merit to it that I can see. If I were Mid-Penn, I would want to come to the table. I think what I heard from Judith Haskell is as wonderful an idea as it might be, the town doesn't have the money to pay to entertain such a notion because they couldn't follow through with a negotiation given our financial predicament, but they could after November, presumably, at least somewhat soon after November. I wanted to propose for our thinking, and perhaps this gets a little bit outside the specific proposal, but we could loan the town money to hire that attorney to address some of the responses to Mid-Penn, including perhaps raising such a bold idea as Carter has just surfaced. I don't know if that is something that
I think it's something that we consider. The reason I brought, I'm bringing it up, tonight is to, vet the idea, in the beginning with us, and see if, anyone else is as crazy as I am,
Well-
to take on something, so substantial. Because since the open space, acquisition funds, have been, the taxes have been in place for decades, and really this is the opportunity. This is a place where the open space district has owned the land now for 15 years, and not one public person, has been allowed on the property other than being, supervised. It's an asset that should be open to the public. The town's management of that would open it to the public almost immediately, I would expect. And that it would be used in a more appropriate way with, better preservation and more, access by the public. And it would still be a regional asset.
So a quick question as we're moving towards the end of this conversation. May I propose that we revisit this particular idea and perhaps entertain, because if you're on the town council, how do you approach, because that is a very big idea. And we're coming at it at a time where the town's priorities are to get this ballot measure passed. At least I think that that would be number one. And a time when we are short-handed at the staff level.
I think that there's a, you know, I mean, taking a bold move, with the open space, acquisition committee funds, in concert, with, some other things the town, is contemplating, could create some energy, that helps the town, in ways that, would be immeasurable.
Could be a fundraising opportunity.
Yes, it could.
So anyway, I just,
But
I think, I mean, I've been working on and off, the acquisition, not the acquisition, but, Hawthorne's for, all of the last, 14, at least 14 years. Cause I was on a team that put together a proposal, to, take on, the, essentially the lease, of the historic facilities. That was unsuccessful, but even the ones, the one that was successful, was by an in Portola Valley team. But the deed restrictions associated with the with the conservation easement, became, enormously problematic. I see that if there's the availability in the relationship between, open space, the conservation easement and open space that might lead to, post supporting a parking lot with thousands and thousands of yards, of earth movement, and the removal of heritage trees, that maybe it's time, that better minds or good minds, with good ideas, could prevail here. And I think if this, this committee, can, provide leadership, and be the impetus, for something incredibly good. Not that, solving our financial problems, in the town isn't good, but doing something really, that really does something, that creates energy and synergy around, open space, because we can all remember, or most of us can remember, when the town, embarked on, the demolition, of the Portola School, buildings, and the building of, the Portola Valley Town Center, what the energy was, and the fundraising that happened around that, and the excitement, and the success, of the 11 acres here, what the good was that came out of that. And I think that same good feeling, the juju that came out of that, could happen again.
So procedural question, should we create a subcommittee to explore this and come up with a proposal? I'm not sure what the right way to move
Jackie, I
forward.
think that's a great suggestion. Would you like to make that motion?
I would love to make that motion. That we create a subcommittee to further explore this bold idea.
And who would you like to volunteer to be on that subcommittee?
Carter, you're very knowledgeable in this. I think
Yes, Carter, I think you bring the
you've
great
got the passion
and
to,
the
yeah.
historical, the
Mhm.
institutional knowledge.
As an aside, I bought a bathtub from the family. Yeah. To water my horses.
I'm happy to join you
Okay.
if you would like that.
And-
Yeah.
And what are the limitations on our, because our committee is, so we can have 3 people on that committee.
And 2 of our members are also absent at this
Yeah,
moment.
I'm not sure I have the extra time to do that right now, just to be.
I think it's
just to
only
be
fair that we
practical.
nominate the people that aren't here. Committees are supposed to work.
And I nominate Terry.
No.
And then Nona and I, would we continue to serve as the Hawthorns, addressing the Hawthorns plan that has been presented?
I think that, that, to me, that's necessary.
Yeah, I think so too. I think
it-
it's important to have a two-prong approach.
I mean, otherwise we, have a Brown Act. I mean, the other, the other way would be, for you two to, to transition, or redirect that committee, to be about the Hawthorne's acquisition.
Mhm. I have another question too. Are organizations like MidPen, do they tend to want to offload some of these properties because it's
Never.
never, they just hold on to them?
I-
Because I know organizations like Post often want, they want to turn it
Po-
over to the
well, that-
county park system.
Well, that's what Post is, I mean, that's their charter,
Yeah.
is that they don't want to own land. They want
Yeah.
to transition
Yeah,
land.
so I just don't know what the structure of MidPen is as compared to Post.
Mid-Penn's, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to make one comment, which is that Carter has brilliantly expressed something that I think has been in the back of the minds of a number of people who've thought about Hawthorns.
Mhm.
And the one concern that I've heard, actually from Nancy Lund, who also has thought in that direction, is that there could be a bequest from the woods that was actually limited to MidPen. And so that's
Mm.
another aspect to think about, is whether or not there is even the possibility of
Okay,
of
back to the
a
lawyers again.
a rich, an incredibly rich opportunity, because there is still a structure there that could have really interesting historic significance and potential for the town. The garage is still potentially still salvageable, and all information points to it being a Julia Morgan structure. So including the leading expert on Julia Morgan has provided some information, and there's other information that Nancy has seen. So this could go in so many different directions and benefit the town in so many different ways, I think. So I'm totally in favor of your proposal.
As am I, totally in favor. I think that's a very valuable point that Nona, you just brought up. Whether, a bridge to cross soon before we belabor a point that we cannot achieve. And then to have a realistic outlook on how long such a negotiation might take. Not only is it, I think, unprecedented, because MidPen's purpose is to purchase, to permanently protect and restore land acquisitions. I did a fair amount of looking, and apart from their office site itself, so the business office site itself, I could find no prior example of their relinquishing a property that they had. So it would be new ground for them. But I think Carter's point, which this 79 acres is completely surrounded by Portola Valley. So it is unique. It's uniquely small relative to their other projects. And Portola Valley is standing on some really important points, but I understand from MidPen's perspective that it will be an arduous process to get this across the finish line. So they might be interested. It's just there are a lot of procedural pieces to get in place between now and when we would be able to enact it. So it will take a lot of heavy lifting, just to be realistic. But I would be
It brings to mind
wildly
an analogy, that, you don't get any ducks unless you put some bread on the pond.
I'm all about casting bread.
So I think Jackie has made a motion.
Second,
Okay. All those in favor?
I
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks for that interesting idea.
and Carter, before
But
we
we're
adjourn.
still short a member.
Sure. Well, Gary had to leave early, as
Right.
well as Terry has
Right.
been not here.
So can we,
I would love to have Nona on that.
I
Oh, I see
agree.
you're still short a member on that committee.
Yes, we're still short a member of the committee. Yes, that was my comment.
How would that, but I wouldn't be on both subcommittees. Can I?
The chairman just said that you can. I see no objections.
Do you, would you, I'm not sure how to think about who,
think
who
it would
brings
be
what to
valuable.
it, to be on. I'm not sure sort of what would be needed that on the subcommittee and what I could contribute. But I mean, I definitely want to see this happen.
Well, so,
So-
so, so,
Yeah, and
well, that's where I'm coming. From, is that, background, knowledge,
yeah,
thoughtful nature.
okay,
I think the other thing that, I believe your participation would, would provide, as a tempering of some of my enthusiasm, a thoughtfulness that, and a skepticism, because I believe that great.
Healthy
okay, well,
Good-
that I can
good-
contribute.
good- Well, I mean, great committee work,
Yeah.
or a great organization is always led, I mean, any committee that everyone agrees on, it isn't going to be
Yeah.
effective.
Okay,
So if, with your indulgence, I'd like you to be elected.
okay, thank you, I accept.
Excellent.
I second it again.
With that amendment, and without objection, it passes.
And may I propose that we consider meeting in May? May 7th would be the first Thursday of May. And I think with the approaching May 13th Mid-Penn Board meeting and the various issues that we might want to put forward to the board and our own town council prior to that meeting would be useful to meet in May. What do you think?
I agree.
I agree too.
Okay, so we'll let the town know that the next meeting is going to be in May, not June. First
Yeah.
Thursday.
First Thursday, May 7th.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair and Committee.
I move we adjourn.
Thank you.
Excellent.